Coming up on Arirang News, President Moon Jae-in vows to help Korea become the world's fourth biggest exporter in the next decade, saying the country should focus on the manufacturing industry to help boost the economy. The leaders of the US and China are set to meet on the sidelines of next week's G20 Summit in Japan as both nations remain deadlocked in a heated trade war. North Korea's denuclearization is also likely to be high on the agenda. And Washington's top nuclear envoy, Stephen Biegun, will be in Seoul early next week as North Korea-US nuclear talks remain in limbo. Eyes will also be on whether he will communicate with Pyongyang. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you as always for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Noaram, filling in for Devin Whiting. We begin with the upcoming trip by Washington's top nuclear envoy to Seoul early next week. With a number of key summits lined up for the next few days, eyes are on where he will go and whom he will meet. Our EG1 starts us off.
U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun is expected to arrive in Seoul on June 25th or 26th, later than had earlier been reported. A Foreign Affairs source confirmed the news on Wednesday, saying that it's not a postponement, as June 24th was not the arrival date in the first place. While President Donald Trump is to visit Japan around June 28th to attend the G20 Summit, Biegun is expected to remain in Seoul for the whole time until Trump's summit with President Moon Jae-in, possibly on the 29th in Seoul. Observers have raised the possibility that Biegun may try to contact North Korea at the border village of Panmunjom during his stay. For now, Biegun is to hold working-level talks with his South Korean counterpart in Washington. Seoul's Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs Lee Do-hoon is in the U.S. capital to attend the Atlantic Council East Asia Foundation Strategic Dialogue. There, the two nuclear envoys are to give keynote speeches on Wednesday morning local time and sit down for talks later in the day. He said he and Biegun will relay the alliance's stance on the current denuclearization negotiations, and that his talk with Biegun and other U.S. officials will focus on how they can resume the North Korea-U.S. talks, which have been stalled since the Hanoi summit ended with no deal. Upon arriving in Washington, Lee said Chinese President Xi Jinping's two-day visit to North Korea on Thursday could contribute to the denuclearization process and the establishment of peace. He also said President Trump's visit to Seoul could be a positive development. 이지원, Arirang News.
Ahead of his two-day visit to North Korea, Chinese President Xi Jinping wrote an op-ed for the North's ruling party newspaper Nodong Sinmun on Wednesday. There, he stressed that Beijing will strengthen its communication and coordination with Pyongyang to work towards peace and security on the Korean peninsula, saying that China is happy to see a historic opportunity to resolve the Korean peninsula issue. The Chinese president emphasized that Beijing is willing to draft together with the North some long-term plans for lasting peace in the region. Xi expressed support towards the North's new policy direction to develop the economy and improve the lives of North Koreans. South Korea's defense minister has addressed the situation surrounding a North Korean fishing boat that crossed into South Korean waters and ran ashore undetected in Gangwon-do province. The boat and its crew remained there until Saturday morning, and it only came to the military's attention following a report by a civilian. During a biennial meeting of some 150 top commanders earlier today, Chung Kyung-do said it was a very grave situation. He added those responsible for spotting the boat will be reprimanded, reversing the military's previous stance. He called for proactive measures to prevent a similar incident from happening again.
Even if the military has done 100 good deeds, if there's a loophole in security operations, the military will lose the public's trust. Rather than blaming its equipment, the military should tighten its operational and work discipline.
The meeting was initially aimed at monitoring the South Korean military's efforts to carry out the government's Comprehensive Defense Reform 2.0 scheme, a 5-year plan to modernize the country's defense structure. In other news, Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam has apologized to the island's citizens again over a controversial extradition bill that sparked massive protests. However, she's still refusing to step down. Hong Kong residents say they'll keep hitting the streets until Lam is out the door. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Hong Kong's under-fire leader Carrie Lam on Tuesday announced the end to the controversial extradition bill, which she pushed and then postponed after it sparked one of the island's biggest protests since the former British colony returned to Chinese rule in 1997.
I have announced that we will suspend the legislative exercise, and immediately that afternoon, we put a stop to the legislative exercise by informing the Legislative Council that the bill will no longer proceed to second reading debate. I said, and I undertook, that if we do not have that level of confidence to address those anxieties and fears and differences in opinion, we will not proceed with the legislative exercise again.
Despite previously calling the protests a riot, Lam carefully reworded her remarks, this time saying the protests were peaceful. But despite her latest public apology, she refused to resign, saying she will instead continue to work for the people of Hong Kong.
As I have a 5-year term as chief executive, soon I am going to have my second anniversary of my office towards the end of this month. I still want to do a lot of work in the future.
Despite the public apology, student activist Joshua Wong, who on Monday was released from jail after serving a 2-month sentence for contempt related to his earlier protests, joined the mass protest immediately. He vowed to continue fighting, just like he did during the umbrella movement 5 years ago.
In the next 1 to 2 weeks, civil disobedience and also different kind of action might be the plan that happens soon. What we mean is, for this movement compared to the umbrella movement 5 years ago, is more leaderless, and also it become more organic, at the same time more decentralized.
The position of chief executive is not elected by the citizens of Hong Kong, but instead chosen by a 1,200-member committee. The umbrella movement of 2014 called for democratic reforms to this process, but they were eventually rejected. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
US President Donald Trump is formally launching his bid for re-election in 2020 with a huge rally in Orlando, Florida. He's no longer the dark horse candidate that few people thought would win back in 2016, but there's little doubt the love him or hate him president has a few challenges to overcome. That said, Trump being Trump, he's sure to have a few aces up his sleeves in the months to come. Oh Soo-young with more.
And as long as you keep this team in place, we have a tremendous way to go. Our future has never, ever looked brighter or sharper.
He promised a break from traditional politics. And in his second run for America's top office, US President Donald Trump on Tuesday once again pitched himself as the face of change at a rally in Orlando, Florida.
So he still is the guy who is shaking up everything, and you can see that in almost every day when he does tweets, launches new policies and tariffs and tensions with Mexico and Iran and so on. He is still, to some extent, a disruptor.
Trump's strongest case for re-election is the robust US economy, with more Americans than ever before upbeat about employment and wages.
Trump made this appeal to working class people, and his actions with respect to Mexico and China, with respect to tariffs, I think it does appeal to a lot of people in those battleground states like Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin, as well as Pennsylvania. Another area that really appeals to the base as well is immigration, of course. And so he's taken a very strong stance on that issue, pressured Mexico.
But whether he's made America great again is debatable. Despite strong support from his party and small-dollar donors, polls indicate the greater public are not convinced. Trump has the lowest approval rating in US presidential history, averaging 40%.
Markets are beginning to realize that you can't exactly bank on what the president says. And I think a lot of Americans are sort of sick and tired of the ongoing chaos that is the Trump presidency.
Domestic concerns such as climate change, the expansion of healthcare and abortion rights are likely to be chinks in the armour for the incumbent president, who has largely disregarded these issues. His party's internal polling shows he lags behind former Vice President Joe Biden in key battleground states. However, some say a foreign policy victory of his own could swing voters in his favour.
He could pull off his own October surprise and have a Halloween agreement with Kim Jong-un. I think Kim knows that his best shot is for Trump to have a second term. And he would rather get the substance of a deal that can be built upon rather than roll the dice and just cross his fingers what might happen in 2020.
The insurgent candidate in 2016 and now running as the incumbent. He may now be the establishment, but it's clear President Trump has more shaking up to do in the months to come. Oh Seong, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in has announced his government's plans to help breathe life into the country's manufacturing sector. Speaking during an event in Ansan, south of the capital Seoul, the president said the government will look to increase investment in the manufacturing sector to help it develop new growth engines and become more competitive and sustainable. He also said he aims for Korea to reach the $40,000 mark for GDP per capita and become the fourth biggest exporter in the world by the year 2030, from its current 6th place in the rankings. Global credit rating agency Fitch Ratings and investment firm Goldman Sachs have both cut their growth forecast for South Korea. Fitch slashed Korea's 2019 GDP growth estimate yesterday to 2%, down from 2.5%, citing an economic slump in the first quarter, sluggish exports and falling semiconductor prices. Goldman Sachs cut its forecast by 0.2 percentage points to 2.1%, citing prolonged US-China trade tensions. Goldman Sachs had previously forecast that the Bank of Korea would maintain its benchmark interest rate, but now says there will likely be 2 rate cuts by next year. The lowered forecasts follow similar actions from the World Bank, the OECD and the Bank of Korea. It's now time for an in-depth look at the global markets, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Hwang Se-eun, Research Fellow at the Korea Capital Market Institute. Dr. Hwang, thank you for coming on the line today.
Thank you for having me today.
Now, Dr. Hwang, we are about a week away from the G20 Summit in Japan. President Trump tweeted that he had what he called a good phone call with his Chinese counterpart, adding they will meet next week. This seems to have boosted investors' sentiment. The Dow Jones is up by more than 1.33%, and the S&P 500 is up almost 1%. How do you assess the global markets today?
Stocks ended sharply higher Tuesday as Wall Street increased bets on U.S.-China trade deal after President Donald Trump said he will meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping at the upcoming G20 Summit. Sentiment was also lifted by hope that the Fed will ease monetary policy later this year. Asian share markets jumped on Wednesday as investors dared to hope the Federal Reserve would follow the lead of the European Central Bank and open the door to future rate cuts. Japan's Nikkei rose 1.72% and South Korea's Kospi gained 1.2%. There is reason for the market optimism. However, we need to remember there have been a lot of negotiations between China and the U.S. where they seem to be close to a deal, and then things fell apart. Hope for a U.S.-China trade deal diminished last month after both countries raised tariffs on billions of dollars worth of their goods. Trump also floated the possibility of imposing tariffs on more Chinese imports.
Now, Dr. Hwang, there is a massive announcement that will come on Wednesday, U.S. time. The Fed will deliver its interest rate decision. What can we expect, and what other factors apart from the Fed's announcement should we look out for?
The Fed is widely expected to strike a more dovish tone when it concludes its two-day meeting Wednesday. However, investors will monitor whether policymakers at the central bank lay the groundwork for rate cuts later in the year. Traders are pricing in 3 rate cuts before year-end, according to the market analysts. The meeting comes after jobs growth and manufacturing activity in May slowed down. This, coupled with lingering worries over U.S.-China trade dispute, has led to increasing worries over the global economy. Investors will also pay attention to the prospects of more stimulative measures from Europe. Mario Draghi, president of European Central Bank, said Tuesday that officials are ready with stimulus if needed, adding to expectations for easier global conditions.
Now, Dr. Hwang, the Bank of Korea released minutes of its latest meeting yesterday. BOK chief Lee Ju-yeol has been hinting recently at a possible interest rate cut, and members of the Monetary Policy Board also seem to be taking a more dovish tone. They will have a lot to think about after the Fed's decision on Wednesday. What is your interest rate forecast for later this year?
Several members of the Bank of Korea's rate-setting board expressed ooze over the possibility of slower than expected economic growth during the remainder of the year, also casting doubt over the central bank's growth outlook of 2.5% for the year. Minus of its latest meeting showed Tuesday. The domestic economy must grow above 3% in the remaining 3 quarters to reach 2.5% economic growth. However, such growth will be quite difficult unless the unprecedented boom in the semiconductor market re-emerges. As external uncertainties have increased due to the U.S.-China trade dispute and slump in the semiconductor market, many of market specialists expect the BOK to cut its benchmark interest rate at least once before year-end, depending on the Federal Reserve rate decision.
Okay, Dr. Hwang, I guess we'll have to see what happens after the Fed's announcement. That's where we'll have to leave it today. Thank you very much for your insights today, Dr. Hwang.
Thank you.
Now, as mentioned, there's just over a week left until the G20 Summit in Japan kicks off, but all eyes will be on US President Donald Trump's meeting with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the gathering in Osaka. Aside from trade, North Korea's denuclearization is also expected to be on the agenda. Ko Ryun-hee reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump has signaled a possible easing of trade tensions between Washington and Beijing. Trump tweeted Tuesday that he spoke over the phone with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping and said they'll have an extended meeting at next week's G20 Summit in Osaka. President Trump said their respective teams will begin lower-level talks prior to his face-to-face with President Xi in Japan, and he emphasized the need for talks at this time.
China very much wants to discuss the future, and so do we. So the relationship with President Xi is a very good one.
Speaking to reporters on the same day, White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow declined to provide details of the preparations President Trump mentioned, but emphasized that Beijing must make structural changes for a trade deal.
We want structural changes on all the items, the theft of IP, the forced transfers of technology, cyber hacking, of course, trade barriers. We've got to have something that's enforceable.
China's state broadcaster CCTV also announced that President Xi is ready to meet Trump in Osaka to exchange views on China-U.S. relations. President Xi said he expects positive outcomes at the G20 Summit. And in terms of trade, he stressed the two sides should solve their problems through dialogue on equal footing. This comes after the world's biggest economies have put tariffs on around $360 billion worth of each other's goods since last year. Their trade negotiations ended in May without a deal, and since then, Washington and Beijing have been blaming each other for the collapse of the talks. Analysts say President Trump and Xi are also expected to discuss issues related to the Korean Peninsula, such as North Korea's denuclearization, because the G20 meeting will fall a week after President Xi travels to Pyongyang. An analyst told the South China Morning Post that China may be using North Korea as leverage amid its trade conflict with the U.S. Ko Ryun-hee, Arirang News.
Now, Facebook is set to launch a global cryptocurrency called Libra by next year. The social media giant believes many of its 2 billion active users will one day regularly use the new currency in their daily lives. Hong Yu with more.
Facebook, the world's biggest social network, announced on Tuesday that it is working on a project to make its own digital currency. It named the new blockchain-powered cryptocurrency Libra. Libra is scheduled to launch in the first half of 2020, along with Calibra, a management tool Facebook has created to offer digital wallets to buy things online with Libra and send wire transfers across its platforms such as the Messenger and WhatsApp. The motivation behind this is to create a simple global currency and financial infrastructure that empowers billions of people, as well as offering access to financial services to consumers who don't use regular banks.
In many ways, it's an important phase in terms of where these things are going, because there is that unbanked population, and that unbanked population should be banked, and there are a lot of problems that this will alleviate for this unbanked population, such as small transactions, foreign transaction fees.
But there are concerns over privacy and transparency, as Facebook is currently under federal investigation over its privacy practices. Facebook has pledged not to share Calibra users' financial data with Facebook or use it for targeted advertising. The currency will be governed by an independent organization called the Libra Association, formed by 28 founding partners, including payment firms Visa and MasterCard, and internet companies eBay, Spotify, and Uber.
Meaningfully change their business. I think they believe that decentralization, this idea of centralized parties going away in favor of decentralized networks, is a trend that is happening in the world, and that they need to be a part of that or they'll be left behind. And so this is their effort to go and reach that.
With more than 2.4 billion active Facebook users, watchers say Libra could gain a more mainstream audience than other cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
From next month, South Korea will impose a 10% value-added tax on international IT giants such as Google, Facebook, and YouTube. This is in accordance with the revision to the VAT Act, which passed the National Assembly late last year. The revision calls for a 10% VAT on foreign companies' business-to-consumer digital services, which include online advertisements and cloud computing. The move is expected to increase the price competitiveness of domestic IT firms and to establish an estimate of how much foreign IT firms are making in South Korea through B2C transactions. A recent survey shows the government's vacation support program for workers at small or medium-sized firms helped boost local tourism last year. The Korea Tourism Organization today released the results of a survey on some 1,000 participants of the program. Employees at SMEs can use the program to receive some $85 worth of points to spend on local travel programs through the government's portal site. 54% of the participants last year took time off for a vacation in Korea, and another 40% changed their overseas vacation plans to a domestic vacation. The program also boosted the use of vacation days by 83% compared to the previous year. As the summer vacation is nearing, many people are not only planning to head to the beaches or mountains, but also to some places here in the city where they can enjoy indoor activities such as special movie theatres and VR theme parks. Yoon Jung-min with the details.
Many people visit special movie theaters to shelter from the heat and enjoy their vacation indoors. To accommodate their needs, theaters provide premium services with large beds or couches and cozy lights. These special theaters can cost up to 45,000 Korean won or some $38 per person, but an increasing number of people look for these luxury services to enjoy their summer indoors.
Outside, it's very hot, but inside here, it's pleasant. I can also enjoy hobbies indoors or take a rest, so I often come here. I also plan to visit more often in the summer to stay away from the heat.
It's getting hot these days, and it's stressful. I came here to enjoy a movie while staying cool.
And it's not just movie theaters that are getting busy ahead of the vacation season. Other places are also expecting more customers who wish to spend their vacation indoors. Virtual reality or VR theme parks give people the chance to experience rafting, fishing, or surfing through VR games so they can enjoy those activities while staying cool indoors. The park also has a VR horror zone for chills of a different kind.
Of course, you will feel it's more real out there, but inside here, it's convenient and easy to access these activities.
An increasing number of people also visit Gwangmyeong Cave in Gyeonggi-do Province, which is only about an hour from Seoul Station by car. As the vacation season nears, many people are looking for places to shelter from the heat, making such attractions increasingly popular. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And that is all the news we have for you at this hour. Thank you as always for watching. I'll be back with Han Daeun at 7 p.m. Korea time for Arirang News Center, so don't go away.